So we're kicking off our third match here. Our current record is 1-1. We get paired against Medvedev, who I look up and find out that they're on Upsal spells. We choose to take the play after winning the die roll here, reveal our companion, and we open this absolute stinker of a hand. This is probably not capable of against just about anything in the format. Maybe you could keep this against like a mono white initiative with double swords to plowshares, double wasteland, but I think the rest of the time, it's a mull to 6 against that deck, but maybe you could keep it there. I'm not sure. I'd be willing to try it for science, but I would never be keeping this thinking that I was playing against Oops or in the blind. So we mull. And we keep this 6-card hand. We're going to bottom our third path Iconoclast. This isn't an amazing hand by any stretch, but we can bauble ourselves, and if it's not a force, then we will basically just fetch it away. So we get a redraw off the bauble, and then after that, we can then try and brainstorm into action. And if we make it through the first turn, if our brainstorm manages to find our force, if we need it, then we can try to deploy Lavinia on our next turn. And we're just going to hope that this is enough. I think we're kind of more hinging on winning post board in this matchup. But here goes. So we bottom the Iconoclast. So we get to keep the Expressive Iteration as our force pitch in this plan. We'll possibly brainstorm if our bauble finds our force of will. So we go ahead and bauble ourselves. See a Volk, which we don't want. So we'll just go ahead and fetch in response to the trigger. And opponent starts jamming out vast quantities of mana here. So he casts a Dark Ritual into a Grief, which is not what I expected. I was 100% expecting the Dark Ritual to drop a, Balustrade Spy basically into play. And I was expecting that this would be elicit a brainstorm from us, which this still will. But I was expecting it to be a much scarier card. So the Grief is fine. We get to tuck our Lavinia, no matter what. And we draw Lavinia Probe. So we get to tuck both of these two. And this means next turn we get to probe, find out what opponent's working with, and they reveal Narcomoeba Seagate Restoration, so not an amazing hand by any stretch. We get to draw our Lavinia, deploy it, and put our opponent in a much worse situation. So Lavinia against Oops, I think is probably lights out. Unless they can clock us with the Grief. I think they just, because they need to flash back Dread Return, I think Lavinia just beats this every time. So we will let the Grief chip in. Opponent plays a Narcomoeba, which is not at all scary. And we can always do something like, if we want... Oh, actually, no, we can't trade a Lurrus with a Grief, can we? Because Grief has Menace. So we'll crack in for 2. We're not chumping the Grief anytime. And this kind of just means we now need to look for exactly third path Iconoclast. That's our best card. And we're not going to drop it here because we want to still be able to hold up a blue card for Force of Negation. This turn we get to play our guy. Once I figure out how to tap mana. And this should pretty shortly be able to gun the board up badly enough that Grief can no longer attack in. We're taking a slight risk here in that we're pondering. And we need to shuffle this. We want a blue card. So I think the only card that really stresses us out here is like a Chain of Vapor. So as long as we can dodge a Chain of Vapor, I think we're fine. So opponent no longer wants to crack in with the Grief since we can now double block and take it off the board. And we will play our Dreadhorde Arcanist here. And I think Dreadhorde Arcanist should... Actually, no, because they can block the Dreadhorde Arcanist and remove it. So we do actually need to go looking for Swords to Plowshares. So we'll ponder here. We find our sword and a Mishra's Bauble for next turn. And we can even get rid of the Strip Mine with a Preordain, because I don't think we want that. Swords the Grief. And I think this essentially means from here the game's very likely to be over. Yep, an opponent scoops. So, game 2, we are obviously on the draw. And we have another unkeepable hand, so this doesn't interact until... Yeah, it just doesn't interact. It doesn't actually really do a great deal. Like, we get to probe, we get to see their hand, but we don't really have any decisions to make out of it. Eventually we'll get a Dreadhorde down, but it's just too slow. This has a Force of Will and a Pyroblast and a threat. So we're kind of inclined to keep this. We're going to play Dreadhorde on turn 1, bottom the swords. We should check how I sideboarded for this. So I've kept 1 swords in just for situations like before, where we just need to be able to push damage through. We've brought in our Surgical Extraction, both Tormod's Crypts, our Flusterstorm, and our last Force of Negation, so we can max out our force count. And we've trimmed, as I said, 3 of the swords, 2 baubled, and a third path Iconoclast. So we've bought it quite a bit in. I bought it in the last Reb 2, which I'm not sure was actually correct. I think that's probably not where we want to be in this match. Oh no, I didn't bought it in. I bought it in a Shattering Spree, which I do actually like. I think the Shattering Spree, like, it's good to have just something to take care of a Charbelcher. So opponent's leading on Seagate, Reborn. And so this is looking like a hand where they're less likely to have Force of Will, since they've already gone through so many cards. They may still have it, but with the Belcher here, I mean, we need to force. We can't afford to think about allowing that through. So we force and hope they don't have any backup. They don't. So we will now run out our Dreadhorde Arcanist. And opponent's unlikely to be able to cast another Charbelcher this coming turn, and we now have Surgical Extraction up for if they try to go through the graveyard. So a land is actually probably our best draw there. I'm not sure about the Wasteland here. I don't know if it was necessary. I guess that cuts them off a mana. We'll just chip in while we can. Currently doing 2 damage a turn, so we will eventually win. We just need opponent to miss quite a bit. Brainstorm is another great pickup. We've been pretty lucky with our draws so far. And that's right, so because we get to Brainstorm twice this turn, we will want to keep Force of Negation, Expressive Iteration, because I think we want to Ponder next turn, as that will let us draw 2 cards and still be able to hold up Pyroblast. An Expressive Iteration might let us do that, but this guarantees it. So opponent's still really shy on mana. So we get to Ponder, and I think in this situation we get to take the Force of Will. And we'll take the second Force. And then pretty shortly we're going to be able to hold up something like Hardcast Force of Negation, plus Force of Will, plus Surgical Extraction. Or, you know, double Force of Will, Pyroblast, Surgical Extraction, whatever we are, whatever combination we feel like holding up. So Ancestral's a nice draw here. I'm going to snap it off straight away. It is going to make us overdraw a little, but, you know, we can hit a land. Which we do not. We do hit a Shattering Spree, though. So this turn I get to Shattering Spree his Chromox, or Shattering Spree their Chromox, and then Shattering Spree their Lotus Petal. Just really heavily constricting them on mana. And I'm going to discard a Force of Negation here. Because I think we're already pretty flush with forces. So they now have a black source, so they can now actually try to ritual out a win, except we hit a Wasteland. So we're going to go straight after the black source here. And then I make a decision to surgical the black source. The reason to do this is because I think it will make it incredibly, like, we're already putting them in a position where it's hard to win. This will make it close. So I think this means the remaining black sources will be a Mox and a Lotus, and that means they've only got 2 cards that they can draw that will let them cast their black spells, and then outside of that we can actually surgical the Charbelcher as well, if we decide that's what we want to do, and then they will just, you know, like, basically have close to no threats. So instead of getting to do that, opponent concedes.